I also won't say that T. Higgins is bulletproof, but what I will say about T. Higgins, who's my wide receiver selection, is that it can't get much worse than what we saw early on in the season from T. Higgins. To his
True story.
benefit, it was a lot to do with injury early on. We saw a massive blow up game against Baltimore in week 2. A lot of folks who drafted him were expecting this change off between him and Jamar Chase, kind of like an A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith situation,
Mm-hmm.
or Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, whatever you want to say. We expected a little bit more back and forth, and the injury just, it zapped him. And then he's dropping every pass that comes his way in the middle of the season. And if you rostered T. Higgins and watched the Bengals actually play those games, I can't imagine the level of frustration. The good news, however, is that before this most recent injury that kept him out of week 10, we saw him get back to that. We saw him get back in week 9 against Buffalo to being that guy. 9 targets, 8 receptions, 110 yards. That's the T. Higgins that can show up in your stat sheet quite often. Not as often as Jamar Chase. I'll grant you that. But it can happen often. So once he comes back, now I do not expect him to play this upcoming Thursday night football. It looks like he is doubtful for that, which in my book, fine, good. Keep him out on the short week. Let him get an extra
Mm-hmm.
few days of recovery before you send him back in. So that way we have him nice and fresh for the stretch here. But there aren't any bad matchups coming for T. Higgins that I can see here on this list. Again, I don't want to overstate things with injuries, but Jamar Chase is also dealing with a back injury that could flare up literally at any time down the road. So if that were to happen and T. Higgins is active and Jamar Chase is not for whatever reason, you've been gifted essentially a top 6 wide receiver for those weeks. But even if that doesn't happen, I'm super in on T. Higgins.
Mm-hmm. And I see we have a question in the chat, but let's finish up the wide receiver discussion here before we get to our question in the chat. So mine is Romeo Dobbs. He's my wide receiver here. Can't even say it's a homer pick.
Sure,
We
you
love our
could.
Green Bay Packers, but since the bye in week 6, he's been averaging like 7 targets a game. He's had 3 touchdowns in the 4 games since then, and he's been finished in the 9 games he's played in. He's finished 5 of them within the top 30. Now, we're not talking a high-end wide receiver here by any means, but this is a guy you can plug into your lineup as a flex play and for bye-week fill-ins, and he's going to be scoring you points. I think what we've seen over the last few weeks here is that he is becoming Jordan Love's kind of de facto wide receiver 1 on this team. Christian Watson, for whatever reason, him and Love just aren't clicking. And Dobbs seems to be the guy that he looks for, especially towards the end zone right now. And that's what I really like. I know the scoring opportunities in Green Bay aren't as prolific as we'd like to see, but when they do get down there, it seems like they're immediately trying to get Dobbs the ball. So as the season goes on here, I expect him to become even more and more involved as Love is becoming more and more comfortable with him and kind of relying on him. So just given all that, that's why I like consolation, just to throw it out there for you, Jake. I thought about throwing Jaden Reed on here because he has been flashing the last few weeks too. But ultimately I said, Dobbs is the wide receiver 1 for this team right now. And to be able to get him so cheaply where he's at right now, I just think it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I like Dobbs. He has the most consistent hands by far out of that group and the most consistent fantasy production out of that group. You're expecting double-digit fantasy points every time. His ceiling is maybe not the moon, but you can reasonably expect between 10 to 16 fantasy points every single week. You do need guys like that in your lineup down the stretch here. So I agree with that.